If you're struggling with something and you need help, for the sake of the team, you need to speak up. What's worse if you stay silent and then you end up having a real problem and holding the whole team back because you didn't want to admit that you needed some extra help. Sometimes that's harder for us to admit, but that was part of your responsibilities too.
Mike, it is awesome to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you having me.
To start, one of the emails that I feel like I get over and over, Mike, I don't know if you hear this teaching or from those that you work with, is maybe someone's a mid-level leader and they are all about this. They care for their people. They're all in. They're growth focused. They're working on themselves for the benefit of both themselves and those around them. But they say, but my boss just really isn't into this stuff. He or she's more of a numbers person and like, just get the job done. I don't have time for all that getting to know you stuff. That soft skill stuff that you guys always talk about. I've had a boss like this before. What advice do you give to the person who's not the CEO or the senior person, but they're in the middle of an organization and they are all about this? They're all in on this stuff of the most important things leaders do, like caring and admiring your people and getting to know them better, but they're not necessarily supported that well. What advice do you have for that person?
I think that when we have the person who is leading us, our boss who is in front of us, and it's not going very well, I don't have any magic formula for that other than just stay the course, because things will change. I always felt like you're in that kind of situation. It's like, oh man, this is just tough it out and things will change. Either that person will move on or you'll move on, you'll get promoted up or whatever it might be. And it's not a great situation. I don't know if you could change that person. It's always good, I think, to do things by example. So if that leader sees how you're leading your team and how you're interacting with people, the light bulb might come on, but it might not. And I think sometimes it's unfortunate that that happens, but it certainly happens. It's happened to me many times where you had someone in front who's leading who doesn't really care about you. It doesn't happen. I guess it didn't really happen to me at NASA, but I've seen it in other places where you're just like, oh man, this isn't very pleasant. This person just really cares. They've got their own agenda. And you can say whether they're different or they're introverted or whatever, but that's not really the case. It really is whether or not that person cares about you and makes you a priority. And the leader needs to do that, or else they'll eventually fizzle out, I think. So I think what I've seen in my experience as I'm getting older, when there's someone like that who's in there, they typically are not successful. They don't always last, even though it seems like when they first come in, this is going to go on forever and be very successful. If the person is truly like that, I think what will happen is they'll eventually fizzle out, move on, be replaced. And I think that if you're in that position in the middle, just keep doing what you're supposed to do, what you think is right. And I think it may take a little while, but I think you just need patience and survive it.
I was reading Spaceman, your book, New York Times bestseller. God, so beautifully written, man. But this morning on the elliptical, and I love two things. I'm into space, man. I love the planets. I love studying it. I grew up loving it, everything. Like I always said, like the second favorite job, if not a professional athlete, was to be an astronaut. So I'm really into this stuff. Cool. Maybe not as much as you, but your description of the feeling of going to like the last bathroom on Earth and then making your way onto the space shuttle, especially for your first time, and how scared you were and how it was you and one other rookie, then I think 5 veterans, I believe, for your first trip to space.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't know if you had help with that or you're just that good of a writer, because I just felt like I was inside there with you of like what it sounds like, what it feels like to go up into space for your first time. Can you reenact that for me? What is that like, the last moments before you're loaded on to the spacecraft and you're then launching, and what that like, take us inside the feeling of the sounds and all of sitting in that seat while you're working to get to orbit.
Yeah, well, I did to sort of address something you mentioned about having help. I did have a co-writer on both of my books. The same guy, his name was Tanner Colby, a good friend of mine. So he helped me on my first book and also on the second. He didn't necessarily. The first book, we kind of spoke a lot and recorded stuff, and then he would transcribe, he'd get it transcribed, and we would massage it into stories. The second one was a little bit different, where I would write, and then he would go over it and tell me what I think I needed, or make suggestions, or help me that way. So I did have help. So a lot of the credit, I think, goes to both of us, actually, because we worked together.
So good. They're so good.
Writer.
It's like they're like a novel, but it's true. It's so hard to do. So anyway,
I appreciate you saying that. So just in general, I think collaboration is good.
Yep.
And I think having a co-writer with you, and I don't know I don't know what I mean, sometimes there's a ghostwriter who kind of writes the whole thing and your name goes on. It wasn't that case. We really wrote together. So I think that having someone to help you is always a good thing. And I always felt, well, is the book going to be better or worse without talent? And I had the right guy. So I appreciate you saying that. We spent a lot of time and we worked together really well on it. But taking you through that stuff, those last few hours or so on Earth are kind of, before you go off on this journey, kind of interesting, because that day's a big day. Either things are going to work out well, they may not work out that well either. They're not always good days. Sometimes they're really bad days launching into space. So there's a little bit of that in the background, but you're really more excited when you get to that point. It's time to execute the plan. And it's okay, I think, to be nervous and worry about things ahead of time if it helps you with your preparation, your planning. So I think being nervous shows that something's important to you and you need to get ready, and that's all good. But when it comes down to actually to showtime there, it's really better to move forward with confidence and execute the plan that you've created. I talk about the 3 trusts, which was when looking up at the spaceship that very first launch. When we arrived at the launch pad, it was the middle of the night, so it was dark out, and the space shuttle was very brightly lit. All the support structure was taken back from it, and there was smoke coming off. It was just water vapor, but it looked like it was smoking. And it was making these really unworldly noises. It's just these horrible screeches. I think it was the cryogenic fuel going through the pumps. And it sounded like it was moaning. And it sounded and looked like it was an angry beast. And I thought to myself at that point, Ryan, I thought maybe this wasn't such a good idea. But it was too late. It was launch day, for Pete's sake. And this day had been in the making for many years. So I like
that you wrote about the SWAT team guys. And you're like, because it was right after 9/11. And so you're like, were they protecting us, or are they actually like looking me dead in the eye saying, hey, dude, you're going up?
Exactly. I think those guys, because I kind of looked like, can I run for it? And I was like, these guys will run me down and just throw me in there anyway. It's not going to do me any good. I might as well try to look cool. But they had those weapons. I thought they're here to make sure we get on board. They don't think about it, buddy. You're getting on board that spaceship. But once I got on, I was fine. I mean, even once I got on the elevator, we went up. I was fine, because now you're into the routine. And I think the things I learned from that is that thinking about something's always worse than doing it, man. Our brain can really freak us out. Oh, what's going to happen here? And I think that, like I said, I think it's okay to be nervous ahead of time. But once you're in the moment, that probably doesn't help you. Remember, okay, this may seem bad now, but once I get into it, it'll be okay. Thinking about it's worse than doing it. And then the 3 trusts that I mentioned a moment ago, trust your gear, that you've checked things out, all the stuff that you're going to need to help you be successful, the technology and so on will be there for you. You need to trust your training. Typically, we're not set up for failure when we're given an assignment. Our name wasn't picked out of a hat. We've gotten that assignment because we deserve it, and we're well trained, and we've come to the day of whatever that event is, and we have to trust that we are ready to go, or as best prepared as we can be for that event. And then trust your team. Rarely are we thrown into situations alone. Life is an open book test, typically, and there's going to be people that support us if we need some help. We should not hesitate to ask for help. And I think those 3 trusts lead to the 4th, which is trust yourself. But I always had trouble just trusting myself. Am I really ready? But if I thought, I know I've got the right equipment, I've been trained, I may not think I'm ready, but they wouldn't let me go if I wasn't. And I have a team behind me, and then that gave me a chance to trust myself and move forward with confidence.
That 4th one deals with I feel like this is another question that I get a lot, especially someone who maybe they're promoted and they wonder, they have some imposter syndrome, and are they going to find out that I'm not fully qualified for this? And I got to believe that getting chosen to go into space, so many people want that. and so few get it. So did you ever experience imposter syndrome or not trusting yourself, or like, how did they pick me? What did I do? And then if so, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, I think most people, I don't know if most people do or not, but a lot of people I know, I think would probably say they felt that way, unless you're an egomaniac, which I think is the other direction. Oh, I deserve this and that. We got some advice from a guy named Bob Cabana, who was the chief astronaut when I arrived at NASA. And he's a Marine Corps colonel at the time, space shuttle commander, very good man. Now he's up at NASA headquarters helping to run the whole agency. He ran this Kennedy Space Center for a while. He's a good friend of mine. But at the time, I didn't know him very well. Of course, I was a new guy and he was the boss. And we were all the new astronauts. This is when we showed up for work. It was August 12th in 1996 was our first day of work. So anyway, we show up on that Monday all dressed up because there's going to be a quick press conference after we're getting sworn in as those of us who weren't government employees. And Bob comes to say hi to us. And he's the boss. He's the chief of the office. And he said he was very happy to have us. He wants to welcome us to the astronaut office. And they're thrilled to have us and looking forward to working with us. But he says, I want you to remember that for every one of you, there are thousands of people who would gladly do anything to trade places with you this morning. And you owe it to them to do your best, because the only difference between you and them is that you're more fortunate than they are. And I thought that was a pretty good way of putting it, that we are deserving to be here, but we're also very fortunate. And I felt like there was thousands of people that could have had my spot who were just as deserving as I was, but I somehow got it. And yeah, did I feel like I fit in? I don't think I ever really felt like that I was necessarily deserving. I felt like I was very fortunate, and that because of that, I needed to do my best with that opportunity. I still can't believe it happened. I mean, I don't know if you show this on YouTube or anything,
Yeah,
but you can see over my shoulder, my patches. Every time I look at them, Brian, I check to make sure my name is on them, because I can't believe that it actually happened, even after all these years. So I think it's okay. I think the imposter syndrome thing shows that you're humble, unless it like totally ruins your confidence. That's not good. But I think it's okay to be a little humble and realize that I'm pretty lucky to be here. And I think I tried to look at it that way. Not that I wasn't qualified, because they wouldn't have picked me if I wasn't qualified. I mean, people don't mess around. When you get a job, you get a job for a reason. And maybe a mistake is made here or there. But I think that a lot of times it's more the attitude might change, or you might change after you get the job. And that's what kind of, when Bob said that to me, when he said that to the whole group, Bob Cabana did that first day, and made me realize that we really haven't done anything yet. We all went through our own journey to get here. There were high-performing people from the military test pilots who were the best pilots in the country. People from around the world, too. We had 8 different countries represented. These are like some really high-performing people, great people from around the globe that we were going to be working with. And so it's you're there for a reason. They picked you for a reason. When I've seen people go wrong is when all of a sudden now they feel like they've made it and they feel entitled. Yep. And then they go down the toilet is what happens. Because all of a sudden, if you change everything that got you to that position, that opportunity, you still haven't done anything with it yet. It's a great accomplishment to get through school or to get that job you want or whatever it might be. But the reason you got that is because you worked hard and you had certain qualities. And if you all of a sudden change, you feel entitled or feel like you've made it, and then it's a recipe for disaster right there. So I think a little bit of that imposter syndrome, maybe, if you call it humility, or I think that's okay. Yeah. But you should try to remember and trust that you're there for a reason. And that was hard for me. I think maybe more than others. I felt like, maybe I don't deserve to be here or whatever it is. But that would have those kind of thoughts from time to time. But then I would try to bring myself to the reality of it, which I was deserving to be there, or else I wouldn't have been picked. That doesn't mean I'm the greatest thing ever and that I'm better than all the thousands of people didn't get in. Again, I think that's where I was just more fortunate than they were. So I think it's good to have a little humility, but you should also try to have the trust that you were picked for a reason and you have the ability to be successful, because your team needs you. If nothing else, your team needs you to perform well, or else you're letting them down.
I've been lucky, Mike, to both record with as well as work personally one-on-one with a number of CEOs, some
Hmm.
of large companies, some of smaller ones. I always ask them why they got chosen. And it's interesting to hear the responses because sometimes people haven't fully thought that through. And then once they have
Hmm.
some time, I always learn something. And there's usually
Hmm.
multiple pivotal moments, whether they really impress the board
Hmm.
or just their series of work year after year led to that point.
Hmm.
And we really deconstruct the excellence along the way. A lot of learning happens. So I'm curious.
Yeah.
I see the two mission patches behind you,
Hmm.
right? They hang up on the wall forever. Huge deal. Why do you think you got chosen for each of those two missions?
I think, well, I think what for the astronaut off, if I can go back and say why I think I got chosen, I haven't
Yep.
ever really thought about that much, but I can maybe give you an answer there. Maybe that helps with this. I felt like there were certain qualities I had that to show that or certain accomplishments or qualifications I had to show that I could do the job. I had my PhD in engineering. I had some good work experience in the space program. I had some teaching experience in engineering. So I'd flown some experiments in space by the time I ended up getting accepted. I had a private pilot's license. I had a scuba qualification. I had done a fair amount of, public speaking here and there. I think I showed that I was presentable and I was smart enough or qualified to do the job. And I always felt like those are the things that I would try to get and then get those qualifications so I could be a good candidate and a good astronaut if I was ever selected. And then I think the other part is just who you are as a person. By the time you get to the interview phase, it's really just about getting to know who you are. I think at that point, they're pretty convinced that everyone they typically interview 120 finalists that come in for a few days of interviews. Of the interview is just an hour and a half, but there's a lot of medical exams and so on. But it's by the time you get there, it's like, all right, this person can do the job. Let's see if everything checks out medically for them. That's part of the medical exam. And then who do we think we could trust within our organization? And I think that, or who could fit in well and be a team player. And I think that's where they might have seen me as someone that could be a team player and was passionate about the space program and would work hard and wasn't just looking to check off another box. I think that's another thing. If you're just looking, I used to start looking at applications. As soon as you get picked, then you become part of the process to select others a few years after you get some experience. And I would look for someone who I thought could do the job, was well-rounded, but also had a passion for the space program because it was a job. It wasn't, I think some people think of it as like this public relations thing, and it wasn't that. It wasn't a lot of glamour. It was a lot of late nights in the simulator. And I knew that as well. I knew that it was a lot of hard work and that you kind of go anonymously. You were saying like Alan Bean, the fourth guy on the moon. There are a lot of people don't know Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin most likely, but they don't know the other guys. And there's
Mm-hmm.
a few comedy routines that are quite funny about that. But
Mm-hmm.
there are 12 people that walked on the moon, and people don't know many of them, probably most of them. And so it's somewhat a job in anonymity, and you're working hard and not getting what you might think is a lot of glamour out of it. You're just kind of doing your job. So I think that was part of it too, that I look at someone that would be dedicated enough to the program that would do the job. I think as far as what went on for me actually get picked to my flights, I think my first flight, they were looking to assign the rookie to spacewalk on Hubble for the first time. They had 3 Hubble missions by the time I was on the 4th and 5th. So that by the time they were looking to it, where I was eligible to be assigned, they had already done 3 of them. And the first one, they had all experienced spacewalkers. You always have 4 spacewalkers on those missions, 2 teams, 2 pairs. And the first one was everyone had to have spacewalking experience. The second one, they had 2 with spacewalking experience who were like the team leaders, and 2 guys that had flown before but had never spacewalked. And they did that for the 3rd mission as well. And then the 4th mission, they were going to have a total spaceflight rookie be one of the 4 spacewalkers. So that kind of put me in a certain category where they're looking for someone. And then I did my best to demonstrate that I could do a good job on this mission because I knew that when we start, what they did is they did these development runs. So it was almost like tryouts. Really wasn't tryouts. You're trying to develop the procedures, but they would pick a pool of people. And my assumption was the pool of people that were selected to do this development would have a leg up, a pretty good chance of maybe being assigned to the actual flight. So once I kind of got that impression, then I was full in and kind of did whatever I could to clear out my calendar to focus on what I was going to be doing in the pool to develop these spacewalks. So I watched a lot of tape from previous missions, tape from that they had done in the water, how they were doing these different tasks. I spent as much time as I could learning the hardware. I came in on the weekend. The stuff was still topside at that point. So we were going to practice in the water. And that's when I said, all right, there's a chance here, and I would love to be on this mission. So I think that part of it helped. And then the other part, too, is I think they felt like I was someone that could fit in and get along with people. And I was actually told that by the chief of the office. He's like, I can assign you to anybody because you could get along with all kinds. Oh, that's a great reward. Give me the difficult people. That didn't necessarily happen because I flew with really great people, but I think that's what they saw as well as something I could add that to a crew too. Make it a little bit fun when things got rough is very important to have someone who could add a little levity, and I think I fulfilled that role as well.
It feels like you got to have both, which is the competence and the character, which leads to ultimately trust. Competence and the character. You got to know all of your stuff. You got to check every box on the resume, but then that's not enough. You also have to have all of the character elements to be collaborative and work well with the team and be proactive and be a leader, be able to handle adversity, because I'm certain that probably pops up all the time. It's such a great metaphor for life, competence and character. Like if you bring that to the table for whatever it is you're going to do, I like your odds. I like your odds.
Yeah. And that's pretty much what I try to tell people about, like now that we're talking or when I give a talk somewhere or with the book is, and I didn't study this like intellectually about this sort of thing. I'm not, but these were just things that worked for me and that worked in the space program. And what I found is that they relate to our everyday lives. It's a good way to approach your job, no matter what it is, if you're working at a desk or if you're working in a studio recording things or if you're at home doing your work at home. I think these are lessons and takeaways, actionable items that apply not only to our work life, but also to our personal life when dealing with our families and friends. Yeah, I agree with you. There were things that I learned in space that apply to Earth, and that's what this discussion, I think, is all about.
You also brought some fun and some marketing elements. I don't know when that started, but you tweeted from space. I think you're the first. You got millions of followers. So you that's not normal for the regular astronaut. When did that come about, and what was your strategy when it comes to making it fun, to the marketing side of things, to social media, from doing it up in space? I'd love to hear more about that.
I think what happened there, Ryan, is that there's certain things that you just enjoy doing, and you don't even necessarily have to promote yourself in a lot of it. It'll just naturally happen. We all went through media training as new astronauts before they would let us do any. We had that one press conference I think I mentioned earlier when Bob Cabana welcomed us, and then we went into this press conference, and then that was it. We weren't allowed to speak to the press for like 2 years. That was it, because you were going to be heads down doing your training, no distractions. And part of our training was media training. So that was how to deal with the press if you get asked a question, or how to deal with an interview, but also how to give a presentation. And what I found is that I enjoyed that probably more than my other classmates did. I was kind of muddying along with a lot of the systems on the space shuttle. I was doing well with the spacewalking and robotics. There's some things I was doing okay with, and other stuff I was having a little more trouble with, but just kind of hanging in, doing my best. But the media stuff seemed to come naturally to me especially compared to the other folks, because I think they were kind of more like, oh, I just want to fly in space and do my job, and this is a distraction. And I can understand that, but I thought it was important also to tell the story of space to people. And I thought it was amazing, well before I flew in space, just going through the process of getting to the astronaut office and flying in our T-38 jets, and all the training we were doing was extraordinary. And I love telling people about it. And that was part of our job. And I found that, I think NASA realized this. And when I was a rookie on my first flight, I hardly got asked any questions from the press ever. And we had our flight, when we landed, right? We're at the Kennedy Space Center, or all this press conference. It's not a gigantic press conference, but everyone got asked a question except for me. So there were 7 of us there, and everyone said something. but I didn't get a question and I didn't get thrown, and that was it. And that was up. So I didn't say anything. So a lot of it was the veterans talking and and I was just and we were doing this one event where we got our space flight medals. It was at the Visitor Center in Houston. And Sean O'Keefe was the NASA administrator. And he came down there to give us our medals. And he was the brand new NASA administrator who had just started. So he was all pumped up and fired up about this whole thing. And it's a public, there's maybe a couple hundred people in the audience at the Visitor Center. It was at night. It was a very nice evening thing. Anyway, and I'm just standing on the side, man. I'm just like lined up now. I'm the last guy. I was always the last guy in line. I'm the rookie guy. And I'm just like hanging out there. And I'm just like daydreaming. And I'm not even paying attention because I never get asked anything. And I'm thinking about where we're going to go for pizza after or whatever. And my commander says, Mike, as we're answering the Q&A, and I'm like, what? And he says, your experience viewing the Earth? And I'm like, huh? He goes, because I guess someone had asked about the experience viewing it. So my commander's cueing me, and I'm like, what? And he goes, tell us the story when you. So I told this story how I tell it in the first book, Earth was a planet, and Digger, and I tell that story, and the audience loved it. They went crazy. And then the administrator, and when he's saying goodbye or whatever, kind of closing the ceremony, he goes, and Mike Massimino, we're getting you out on the circuit. That's the best story I've ever heard. So that was it. So then Mr. O'Keefe had me do things like I went to the opening of the IMAX version of Apollo 13, and he had me come speak at headquarters for certain things. So I started getting more and more opportunities. And then when it came for my second flight, there was a lot of press interest and news interest. And then they asked me to send the first tweet. I went on David Letterman. I got volunteered to help the people with the Big Bang Theory write a script. And I ended up being on that show 7 times as a result. But that was it. All just one thing kind of led to the other. But it was just sort of when you have an opportunity to do something, even if you never know what it is, even if it's just telling a story in front of an audience, you do the best you can with it, and you never know who's going to notice and what is going to happen.
This is May 12th, 2009, from orbit. Launch was awesome.
Yeah.
I am feeling great, working hard, and enjoying the magnificent views. The adventure of a lifetime has begun. How did that happen?
I was asked to send the first, as far as the way that tweet happened.
Do you type it into a computer or a phone?
Yeah, you just type it down. Well, back then it was a little different because we had email set up. We didn't have a direct internet connection on the space shuttle back then.
Okay.
Or from the space station. So everything was a mail sync. So what I did is I ended up putting that tweet in an email message that then was taken and put out on my account. So it wasn't a direct tweet from orbit, but that's the way I did. I just wrote it in an email. Now you can go directly. Now they have, in fact, it started out with a slow internet. Now it's pretty quick. They can send email continuously, or they can surf the internet and send social media posts and all that. But that's the way it was done back then. But I didn't think too much about it, Ryan, because I had gotten advice from Neil Armstrong when I was a new astronaut. And I asked him when I met him, I said, how did you come up with that thing you said on the moon, which was one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind? And he said he didn't think about it till after he landed on the moon. And then I'm like, really? And he said, if I don't land on the moon, Mike, there'd be no reason to say anything. I said, I guess you're right. And then he went on to tell me how important it is to just stick to your job and not worry about all the public relations stuff. When you're assigned to a mission, a lot of stuff I was saying that we did, David Letterman, the Big Bang, I wasn't assigned to a mission at the time. But he was saying you have to stick to your job. And so it came time, I was asked by NASA to send the first tweet from space. I was like, yeah, sure, love to. And I started using Twitter about a month, not even, like 2 weeks before the launch, I started using Twitter. And I was asked by the press in our last press conference what I was going to tweet from space. And I channeled Neil Armstrong and said, I'm not thinking about that. We got to get to orbit first. Or if we don't get to orbit, there's no reason to tweet anything, and we're not worrying about that. That's what I did. I didn't think about it until I got to space, and I'm looking at the computer in space. I couldn't think of a thing to say. And I was like, that's some bad advice I got from my hero. And I was like, for a moment there, I thought he might have lied to me. Because how can he think of something so eloquent on the moon?
That's what I was going to say. It lives on forever, but I mean... It
lives on forever. And everyone was listening to this guy when it's happened. I'm old enough to remember this. I was 6 years old when it happened, and the whole world listened. Everybody listened to it. No matter who, friend or foe, was listening everywhere around the planet. It was seen as a human accomplishment, which was... I don't think they expected it to be received like that, but the whole world, everyone saw it as not just the Americans going, but as people going, and it was received. We did it, meaning the world did it. Mm-hmm. And everyone he came up with that. And I'm saying, he must have lied to me. I later found out from his sons that no, that was the truth. He told me the truth. That was him. But I just wrote what you said. Launch was awesome, or whatever. Then I got made fun of on Saturday Night Live. They did a bit on the Weekend Update. Seth Meyers said, "We have the first tweet from space, and here it is. Launch was awesome." In 40 years, we've gone from one giant leap for mankind to launch was awesome. If we ever discover life in the universe, I assume this is how we'll be notified. He shows a little Twitter thing that says, "Geez, dudes, aliens." So I got made fun of it. That was on a Saturday. And on Monday, I got email from my kids saying how all the kids at school loved that I got made fun of on Saturday Night Live and I should keep up the good work. So I got some street cred out of that whole thing.
You mentioned being 6 years old, because that was the next question I was going to ask anyway, from when I was reading your first book this morning. I think it's just amazing that, and I want you to tell the story, but about the impact that had on you and the decision you made for what you wanted to do with your life from a very early age. I remember graduating college, Mike, and having no idea other than I just wanted to continue playing football, and I had no thought of anything else. That's not something that you get to decide fully. Like, other people have to say they want you, and that usually ends at some point for all of us. But for you to know and then make it happen, can you walk me through when you made that decision and then the steps you took to say, yeah, I'm going to be an astronaut. I'm going to fly in space, and this is why I want to do it?
Well, I think, Ryan, as you said, it's something very important that you have to get someone to give you that opportunity, and you may or may not get it. And that's the same thing for the astronaut program. It's not like something you sign up for. I remember, I don't think I ever said I'm going to be an astronaut. I might say I'm going to try to be an astronaut, or I would love to be an astronaut. But I knew it was something that a lot of people wanted to do. And you don't just sign up for it. You've got to be selected. And it's not just it's not just your technical ability, it's also your personality. So someone who goes around saying, I'm going to be an astronaut, they're going to pick me, is probably not going to get picked because they're a little bit too arrogant and egotistical and aren't going to fit in. Who wants to be around that person, right? So it's not something that you sign up for. It's something you need to be selected for. Well, the decision or the interest started when I was 6 years old watching Neil Armstrong on the moon, but not that much different than you, Ryan. I didn't know what I was going to do. Past like the age of 8, when I was 8 years old, I kind of came to the realization that things like that would be impossible. I'm never going to grow up to be like Neil Armstrong. I was afraid of heights as a little kid. I hated them. And I still don't like them. Every once in a while is a problem. Not in space, but in some of our training exercises that we did, I wasn't happy about, but I got through them. But also my eyesight wasn't good, and as at an early age, and I was just kind of a scrawny kid. There was nothing really special about me. I couldn't see myself growing up to be this superhero like Neil Armstrong in my mind. That's what I thought these guys were, like superheroes. And so I kind of crossed it off the list. And then when I was a senior in college, and I went through college not thinking I got to become an astronaut or even working with NASA, it just seemed too far-fetched. And I just did things I enjoyed doing at school, my activities and my classes, and I studied engineering. And when I got my senior year, right before I graduated, the movie The Right Stuff came out. And I saw that movie. It's about the original 7 astronauts and the test pilots before them. And I got the book that it's based on by Tom Wolfe, the same name, The Right Stuff, and I read the book. And that got me thinking again about the space program. And I started looking into what it was then. And it wasn't just military test pilots in the mid-1980s now. It was also a lot of civilians and scientists, engineers, and the first people of color, the first women were picked to be astronauts with the space shuttle program. So it was a different program than it was when we were flying Apollo to the moon. So I didn't think I'd ever could become an astronaut still at that point, but I knew I wanted to give it a try. And at least I thought if I tried, I could in some way become part of the space program, even if it wasn't to be an astronaut. So worked for a couple of years and then went to MIT for grad school to try to pursue that. So I think what it was is I made that decision right around 1985, a year after graduating college. I was working for IBM as an engineer, and I was feeling I got to give this a try. I got to see if I can make this happen. So it was a decision to try. It wasn't necessarily a decision that I'm going to do it. I'm going to become an astronaut, because that just seemed still a little bit too crazy. But I knew I could at least try, and that's what I tried to focus on.
1985, interesting year because of what happened the next year. How did the Challenger explosion impact you?
So the Challenger accident happened in January of '86. And I was getting ready to go to grad school. I had decided I was going to go to graduate school to pursue this in September of '86. So I was finishing up, more or less finishing up. I had another 6 months to go on the job, and everything was kind of set up for that. They knew I was going to be going because I 2 years and I was going to take an educational leave of absence from IBM, and they were all very supportive. So everything was going according to plan in that regard. And then the accident happened, and there was a couple things that hit me. One was is I saw this happening on television, and I couldn't do anything about it. I mean, I really couldn't do. I mean, I could feel badly about it. I could talk about it with my friends or whoever wanted to talk about it, and the whole country was caught up in this. And so I watched the news reports and read about it in the papers and followed it, but I really couldn't do anything to make things better. Meaning I couldn't console the families or figure out a way to fly again. I felt so out of it. I felt sort of hopeless, helpless about the whole thing. And that wasn't good. And I was like, this ever happens again, I want to be able to help. And then the other part, as far as being the person who, the astronauts who were killed, I thought that it showed how important traveling in space was, that exploring space was. And I felt like you should feel that way about what you're doing with your life, that it should be worth sacrifices. And you should feel that strongly about it. And actually, I think that's a gift, that you have something that I felt that strongly about it, that I would be willing to take that risk. So it didn't prevent me from wanting to do it at all. In fact, it kind of reinforced how important the space program was to me and how much I wanted to be a part of it. And if anything, it motivated me more.
Wow. That's an inspiring way to look at it. I remember my conversation with Dr. Eric Potterat, who worked with Navy SEALs for 20 plus years. Mm-hmm. When I brought up like the fear of dying, because he worked with Marcus Luttrell, and all of Marcus's guys died on that mission. The Lone Survivor book and movie were made about it. And he actually changed my perspective. And I feel like you're similar. He's like, most people die like in a bed or wherever. And these guys, they commit to like doing this for their country, or in your case, like doing it for space exploration and helping fix the Hubble telescope or whatever may be. And I think that's just a different viewpoint where, yes, that's the ultimate sacrifice, but it's inspiring that people like you exist to say, I am so committed to this mission. I will give everything, literally everything, in order to advance us where I think we need to go. And so I think that mindset is something that I hope like all of us, whatever we decide to do, could like put that much commitment to it is pretty awesome, man.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want bad things to happen,
right?
But you understand that's part of the risk you're taking, and you be really careful and you try to minimize that risk. I never thought we were doing anything foolhardy, and you trust your training, trust your team, and so on. And the SEALs are really good examples of that, of how they work together and make sure their gear's working, and they know that they rely on their training, and they build that trust, and they go in and do amazing things with that. But there's always the chance that things are going to go really wrong. And I agree with that wholeheartedly, that you want to be taking that, you want to be doing something you feel that strongly about. And if you don't feel strongly about what you're doing, that's not worth sacrifices. What are you telling yourself?
You mentioned training and being prepared, and Moonshot, your latest book, one of the chapters, early chapters, is called "No One Leaves the Pool Until Everyone Passes the Test." Can you share more about everyone passing the test and how it applied at NASA and with astronauts, as well as how it could apply outside of the pool and in the business world?
Yeah, that chapter, that story there, I was not a strong swimmer, Ryan. I kind of avoided it as a kid. I was always too skinny to go in the water. I was always freezing, even in the summer, going in the water. So I never really learned to swim very well and kind of avoided the water. And then I was able to learn to scuba dive, though. I was okay with equipment, which was all right. But just like doing all these things in the water that people might do, I kind of shied away from it. And I found out when I was selected that one of the things we were going to have to do, when we got our packet of information after we were selected, you get a phone call and you say, yeah, of course, yeah, thank you. And then they send you info and what you need to do to get ready. And one of them was practice your swimming, because we were going to have to go through a swim test in order to go through water survival training with the Navy. And the reason we needed to go to water survival training is that you might eject out of an aircraft or bail out of the space shuttle and find yourself in a parachute landing in the water, and you got to keep yourself alive in the water. There's certain things you need to do so you don't drown. You can signal for help and so on. So you have to learn how to survive in the water. Before you can do that, That course, you need to pass a basic swim test. And I guess in the past they had sent astronaut candidates out to the Navy and they got sent back because they couldn't swim well enough. They teach these people to swim. They assume a certain level of competence in swimming before they can train. I wasn't feeling good about this, but I knew it was something I had to do. So I started practicing. And I got to the level I was pretty confident I could do everything I was going to have to do to take the course. But I was kind of afraid I'd be made fun of. Here's this guy that's not a very good swimmer and really goofy. And I wasn't looking forward to this whole experience. And when we arrived at NASA, our first week was administrative things, not necessarily any training really. But our second week, we were going to start our training. And on that Friday of that first week, Jeff Ashby, a Navy pilot who was from the class before us and was helping us with our training, kind of shepherding us through that, comes in and he says, all right, the first week's over. Before you go home, I want to remind everyone the swim test is on Monday. We're starting our training, and that's going to be our first event. And I'm like, oh, really? That's the first event? I'd rather a math quiz or something else. Can we do something else here? But I was like, all right, that's it. And party's over. And then he goes on to say, who are the strong swimmers in this group? And a few people raised their hand. And then he said, all right, more important, who are the weak swimmers? And don't lie to me. And so I raised my hand. And he said, okay, everyone who didn't raise their hand can go home for the weekend. We'll see you Monday. But the strong swimmers and the weak swimmers are going to get together. They're going to meet after class. They're going to get together at a pool over the weekend. And the strong swimmers are going to help the weak swimmers with their swimming. So when we get to the pool on Monday, no one leaves that pool till everyone passes the test. And that to me was an introduction to where I was. It happened right away that first week. But this is what it was about. If it was about the team being successful. In that if you were Michael Phelps and set a world record and one of your classmates failed because you didn't help them, then you failed. Your job was to help those who needed help. And on the other end of that, Ryan, which I think might be maybe more subtle, but maybe even more important, is that if you're struggling with something and you need help, for the sake of the team, you need to speak up. And it's not going to be any, oh, this guy can't do this or that. It's like you need to speak up and get help. What's worse if you stay silent and then you end up having a real problem and holding the whole class back or holding your team back because you didn't want to admit that you needed some extra help with something, or you were injured or something was going on that you couldn't perform like you needed to help the team. Sometimes that's harder for us to admit that we need help, but that was part of your responsibilities too. You would never get in trouble for admitting you needed help and getting help. But you would get in trouble if shut up about it and it hurt the team. Like, hey,
I feel like some people would be scared, especially if you don't have a ton of experience. They might be fearful. Like if I point out a weakness, they might just say, well, there's plenty of other people that want to do this. We'll just get them instead of this guy who can't swim or can't fill in the blank. Like you didn't feel that fear. You didn't feel like you felt like I can say I'm weak in this area.
I think maybe I felt more of that before I got into NASA. I was pretty glad they didn't.
So once you're there, you're like, I'm good. Once
you're there, you're part of the team. And it's not like you want to hide things. The other thing is you don't want to hide. If you hide something from them, they're going to find out about it. But then you really don't stand a chance. So I always felt like, I remember my friend Kevin Kriegel, before I got to know him, he was an astronaut, but I met him through a mutual friend and we became friends and we'd see each other once in a while. And he was from Long Island. He was an Air Force pilot. And when I got an interview, I saw him and said, hey, man, I got an interview like next week. You have any advice? He goes, yeah, just be yourself and don't make anything up. If they ask you something and you don't know what they're talking about, what you should say is, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't try to make anything up and that's the worst thing you could do. So never want to lie. No, not a good idea. But luckily they never asked me if I could swim. If they did, I'd have to tell them the truth. Maybe not so much, but they'd never asked us that ahead of time. So there are certain things I guess they were more concerned about ahead of time. In this case, once you're in there, they're like, okay, you're trainable and we're gonna try to get you through this. And this, because now once you're in there, it's not like you're giving them new information that I can't swim. There wasn't a requirement ahead of time. And truthfully, they can get you to the level you need to be at with a person who's motivated. Just about anybody. I am a firm believer, Ryan, you can be trained to do anything if you're a willing student. and you get good instruction. And that meant even my overcoming my fear of heights and even some of the leadership things we did. I never felt comfortable being a leader, but it was part of my job, and they helped train us to do that, or to be a good follower. There's a lot of things you can learn if you're motivated to do your job, to do well. You can learn almost anything. And I think swimming kind of fell into that category for them. Oh, we'll teach them how to spacewalk. We'll teach them how to swim. We'll teach them how to fly. We can do all that. These are these other things we're looking for. So that are maybe more difficult to find. I think that's the way they looked at it.
I'm fascinated by spacewalking, man. I mean, I'm sure everybody is. I don't know how you couldn't be. What's that like before the first time you're about to go out? I don't even know the proper verbiage to use, but you're about to go out into space. And like, one, how do you train for that? I guess it's in a pool, but what's it like then? And I got to ask too, do you have any time to look and be like, oh my God, like I see the Earth, or I see whatever is out here for us, and even for like 3 seconds, and just realize this is crazy? Or is it just 100% focused on, I got a job to do when I get out here, I'm going to do my job, and then I'm going back inside?
We train, I mentioned the pool, that's one of the places we train. We also train with virtual reality, and we have like classes to learn the tools, and we run through and procedures and so on. We have other facilities where you can kind of hang like Peter Pan off of like a bungee cord sort of thing, that you're moving around with that as you're suspended in the air trying to do things. So there's lots of pieces of it, because you can't go to space and practice. You have to go to space and be ready. So you mentioned like playing football, and for me that was the Super Bowl, right? Getting to do a spacewalk, but I never been on a field before. This is the first time I'm going to space, and you got to go out there and spacewalk. But the training is really good, and that's one of the things that I kept remember. Of course, trust your training, what we learn. And so the moments before, those last few moments in the airlock, you're in your spacesuit and you've done a pre-breathe, and everything's triple checked by everybody, and you're ready to go out there, because now you're going out there in your own spacesuit. If there's any trouble with the spacesuit, that's going to be a problem, because all your life support and protection comes from that spacesuit. It's your own little spaceship. And I remember they closed the door and locked the hatch on the inside. And then they're going to depress the airlock, let all the air out of it. And then you're going to open the door to outside. I call it the door to space, which is the hatch. Like, I wonder what's on the other side. And it's quite amazing that once you get out there, it is spectacular what you see. And being out there, I felt like looking through the window the days prior to my spacewalk, looking through the window at the Earth or the stars. It's kind of like you're admiring the fish in an aquarium. Oh, look, because you're looking through a window. Oh, look at that. And you're kind of wearing regular clothes. But now you go outside, it's like being a scuba diver, where I was interacting with that environment. And that's what I felt like in space. I felt like a real spaceman. I'm interacting with the environment. I'm part of it. Me and my buddy are the only two people out here that we know about in the whole universe, maybe. Who knows who's out in a vacuum of space right now? But it was, just the two of us. And that's quite extraordinary. I felt perfectly trained to do my job, to do the procedures and work my tools and the choreography we had and everything, troubleshooting problems, all that stuff we were prepared for, but nothing really prepares you for what you see around you. I didn't look around much my first spacewalk. I kind of stuck to business on that one. It was actually more difficult than my second one was going to be, and with my first one. So a couple of glances. My second one, I really had a chance to look, and the thought that went through my mind from the altitude, we're 100 miles higher from the space station, so we get to see the curve of the planet. And in the spacewalk, you can look anywhere you want. You're not restrained by the window. And looking at the planet I had one of those few moments that I thought to myself, this is a view from heaven. It's a heavenly view. This is how we would be seen. And then I thought, nah, it's more beautiful than that. This is what heaven must look like. We're living in a paradise. And now that we are living in an absolute paradise. And I know there's a lot of bad stuff going on, but the planet itself, I think, is perfect. We mess it up as people, but it really is a beautiful place to be. And I try to every day remember those moments. And as I'm walking around New York City or flying in an airplane across the country or whatever it is, just take a look out the window or take a moment to appreciate what's around me, whether it's the faces in the New York City subway system or the architecture or museums or a park or a mountain or ocean scene or whatever it might be. We are in an amazing place, and it's a home that we all share. When I think of home now, I don't necessarily think of the home on my hometown of Franklin Square in New York. I'm always going to be from there. I'm always going to be a New Yorker which as I started traveling around, I thought of myself more as a New Yorker, and then as an American, as an astronaut. I'm going to be all those things. But I think of myself, when I think of where I'm from, it's Earth. We all, going around the planet so much, everything we know is contained in this one place. And it's a beautiful home that every one of us share, no matter who we are and where we're from. We all are from planet Earth, a beautiful home that we share.
What an amazing perspective. It feels like that has to help with gratitude, I sense, of just being grateful that this beautiful place exists and being able to like live with that thought always in your mind, especially when whatever trouble is happening in life, to have to like revert back to, I remember looking at this place from up there.
Yeah.
The perspective it brings of being grateful that it exists for us all here.
Yeah.
Let's stop messing it up. I
Yeah.
can't even imagine what type of perspective that brings.
Yeah, and you see the fragility of it. You see the thinness of the atmosphere. The only reason I could see that, so the other thing, I looked from the Earth, I looked down at my hands, and I realized I'm wearing a spacesuit. My gloves are in my, and I wouldn't last very long without my life support that I had, which is pretty complicated stuff, right? A very fancy way to keep us alive out there, very complicated. And you can see the thinness of the atmosphere. It's like thinking of the Earth as an onion. That top thin layer of the onion is the size relationship of the Earth's atmosphere with the rest of the planet. So it's really thin. Like, that's the only thing that's keeping us alive. Then you look in the other way, Ryan, and you got the blackness of space and stuff. It's kind of cool. You see stars and things out there, but we've checked out the neighborhood. We got nowhere to go, man. We got to make this planet work. And
is Mars going to work? Is this going to happen? Like, what do you think?
I think we'll go there. It's a very interesting place to go to, but it's not an easy place to be. It's got a lot of radiation. It doesn't have the air like we have. We think there may be water underneath the surface near the poles. We're going to go check that out on the moon as well. There's a theory. But the most inhospitable environment we have on Earth is a much better option than the best place you can find anywhere else that we know about. So it's not like we're going to abandon ship and go to Mars. That's not going to be easy. You got to bring your own life support, and it's not an easy place to live. It's going to be really hard to live there. And you're far away from home, from what we have for help here. So we are really lucky where we are. And I think the space program is not so much about, it is about leaving the planet and going other places, but with the goal of making life better here on Earth. The technology we develop, as well as the things we can learn about our planet to keep it healthy, I think a lot of those answers come from exploring space. So I don't think it means we're abandoning ship looking for a better place, because there is no place anywhere near as perfect as our planet.
I know you're teaching and you have a great job, but if they're like, Mike, we're going to the moon, we want you to go, what do you say?
If they wanted me to go?
They want you to go.
Yeah, I'd go. I don't know why they'd want me to go. I'd probably ask that.
Why wouldn't they want you to go?
Well, because they got a lot of other astronauts that are ready to go right now. But if there was something special that I could do, to go to the moon, I wouldn't second guess that. I would want to go. I would stop asking questions and just say yes.
I know you talk about like 1 in a million, but could that happen?
Probably not.
No.
I mean, it's not something. So it's not something I would necessarily pursue. I think there's other things. So I think like John Glenn, for example, flew in space again when he was in his 70s. You might remember, that was in 1998. I was his family escort. So that was
he's an Ohio guy. I'm an Ohio guy. Yeah, we're big.
Okay, great guy.
Yeah.
But he did a lot of work to make that happen. That was mainly, when you want things, you've got to ask yourself, am I willing? So if someone knocked on my door and said, if Nat said, hey, Mike, we really want you to go to the moon, and I go, all right, fine. But that's no way that's going to happen. And I would not put in, I've got other things I'm doing now that I wouldn't say more interested in, but maybe I think at this point, I'm glad with the experiences I had. I'm getting older, and I actually think that they're better off sending somebody else to the moon. I don't know why they would me. The crew that's going there to orbit the moon, hopefully next year, they were in New York to do the Colbert show and the Today Show right after they got assigned. I think they were assigned on a Monday, and then Tuesday they came to New York City to do some media. And one of the guys, Victor Glover, texted me from JFK when they landed, so from the airport. So he said, you want to get together? I'm like, yeah. So I got to see all of them. They all came to dinner with my wife, and I remember seeing Reed Wiseman, the commander, and I was just so happy for him. I know all of them pretty well. I know Reed longer than the other folks. They're newer to NASA, but I gave him a big hug. Walking down the street, I saw him coming toward me at the restaurant. I walked and met him and gave him a hug. I said, I'm happier for you than I was for myself when I got assigned. I don't know why, but I feel that way about it because I'm so happy we're finally going. And he said, I understand. He goes, I'm going to be happier for the next crew that gets to land because they're not going to land. He's going to be even more happy for them. And I think that's what it is. It's like, I'm just so happy that they're going. I think NASA will be sending people there, but there's a lot of training and sacrifice that needs to go into that. And my time has kind of come and gone in that regard. I think that if there was a chance for me maybe to go to the space station to do some outreach or something like that, that was special that only I could do, or maybe go back to fix the Hubble Space Telescope another time, then I would be totally on board for that. That would make sense. But I think right now they're for most of these other things they're doing, they have people that are much more qualified than I am.
It feels like there's such amazing humility, man, with the astronauts and the team at NASA. That's one of the top tier qualities, and I sense that we all could learn from that. That I've watched From Earth to the Moon. I feel like I've watched every documentary that exists. I've talked to other authors who've written about going to the moon and space in general. And you also watch like Top Gun and see the arrogance of these fictional characters of these fighter pilots, which a lot of test pilots become astronauts. It's like the opposite of what's true. And I've had fighter pilots on too, and they're some of the most humble people I've ever talked to, and extremely collaborative, always talking about their wingmen and like how that works. I still feel like we all could take something like these are some of the most impressive people walking the planet and leaving the planet temporarily. And one of their core competencies and skills they have is being very humble people.
You're absolutely right. And I mentioned earlier that I thought when I was a little boy that Neil Armstrong and all these astronauts were superheroes and superhuman and what they might be like. And sometimes they're portrayed, you said, like in some of these movies, as these arrogant maniacs and egotistical, self-promoting crazy people. And when I started to actually meet them, what I found is they were the nicest people I've ever met. I think it goes for most successful people I've met. They've taken their lumps and they're humble. They're successful people aren't those that never fail. They're those that never let failure stop them. And they're grateful for their opportunities. And I think the truly great people, the truly high-performing, successful people are the nicest people that you might ever meet. And I felt that way about the astronauts. So in some really strange way, although there was a lot of hero worship when I first started meeting these people to work with them, because even as a grad student, I met some and was working on some projects that were related to what they were with the space program. And I found that they were just great people. They were really honest and humble and grateful for their opportunities and people you'd want to be friends with, people that you want in your life. And I couldn't believe that because I felt like we sometimes have this idea, these people are beyond us and they're on a different level and they're just regular people that worked really hard and didn't give up and love what they do and in all factors of their life and their personal life as well. I found that they're really people to admire and I really loved hanging out with them and I felt very comfortable with them. And that was another thing that hit me, that I didn't feel like I had to be anybody else when I was around them. We talked about being yourself in the job interview, but I felt that was the case. And I was shocked because I thought they're going to be these really super performing, high performing people. But they weren't like that. They wanted to help. They wanted when I was in that situation with the pool, with some of the test pilots who had gone through the training already and was going to help me and the other aquatically challenged, it wasn't like they were burdened by doing this. It was their pleasure to do it. And that's the way it was there, that people were there to help each other just because it's the right thing to do. And that makes it a great place to work.
It's just great life and career advice, Mike, that you find these people that are otherworldly talented and successful. And what are they focused on? Showing up to do extra work for the benefit of their teammates.
Yep.
That's what excellent leadership is. That regardless of titles or position, it's I'm going to come on Saturday to help Mike swim and pass the test because he's part of my team. That's what we're going to do. And I think if we all take that approach to wherever we find ourselves, wherever we are, that I'm here to help the team, I'm here to serve others. We're not getting out of the pool until we all pass the test.
Mhm.
I love it, man. The book that I highly recommend both of them, but the most recent one's called Moonshot, a NASA astronaut's guide to achieving the impossible. As I mentioned before, written like a novel, and I use that as good of a compliment as it gets when it comes to a book, because it's a page turner. Like, I just want to keep going. I want to keep reading. It's like, ooh,
Cool.
good stories, good life lessons, good practical application, really good stuff, Mike. So I'm grateful for you. I didn't even realize that we went like over time because it flew by, but I really appreciate this, Mike. It was awesome.
Well, yeah, you did a great job, Ryan. It was fun talking. The time flew by for me, so hopefully your listeners will enjoy it as well. Thanks for having me.
For sure. Thank you. And I would love to continue our dialogue as we both progress, man. This is awesome.
Count me in. Count me in.
Awesome.
100%. All right,
Thank
buddy.
you. All right, man. Thanks so much.